Welcome to another edition of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I am Brian Dietmeyer, and today I'm really lucky to be with Craig Nelson, who is the lead for sales and marketing at Triptych. You've got a lot of other chops, Craig, that are pretty cool. Being part of a couple of software startups, went to IPO, and then also one of the founders of the Sales Enablement Society. So welcome here today.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate you inviting me on to Close Mode.
So in our pre-interview, let's just dive right into this. You mentioned something about revenue enablement meeting CX. That's the future. So can you explain what you meant by that?
You bet. We talked about earlier today, actually, my buy experience recently of this Yeti microphone. So I'm going to use an example like that. Simple example. It's a B2C example, then we'll go to B2B examples later. But I'm walking into Best Buy, and then think about that first couple of minute experience that you have, right? You first want to be able to identify where is the Yeti microphone, and you want somebody to be able to help you and understand that. Then when you get there, you're probably looking for somebody with a blue shirt to understand something about your microphone options.
Yep.
Right. And then ultimately, if you're going to connect this with all these other, pieces of equipment in your home office, you may even make your way over to the Geek Squad, right? Because you want a better understanding of what gain actually means.
That's like the black belt.
Kind of funny.
Yeah.
The black belt version, right?
Got it.
The use of this microphone. But that experience, as simplistic as it is that I just used, that applies to B2B as well. Because in the B2B game, we want to find that person with the blue shirt. We want to find that subject matter expert that can better understand not just what it is, but how I'm going to be able to make it work in my organization. So to me, that's revenue enablement. Everybody in the company gets it. Everybody in the company plays a role in satisfying the customer that moment, that day. And then everybody in that organization understands that experience matters.
And so, yeah, I get that. And let's kind of double click on. So if we think about the traditional sales enablement, what would you say the big difference is between sort of where sales enablement was and where revenue enablement is going?
Yeah, I like that question because when you look back 20 years, and we've been doing enablement for companies, well over a few hundred companies over the 20-year span. Within those companies, oftentimes you understood within minutes as to whether or not marketing and sales were aligned, and if they were, things went better. And sort of one of the main challenges was if you look at sales enablement as a sales thing, there was always going to be this drag in the organization where it was only going to go so far. So when I look today to revenue enablement, it's not so much a sales organizational sales thing, it's more of a company thing. And once we've seen companies that we've worked with over the years take that approach, they went further faster. That organizational drag, Brian, is, it's the siloed challenge, right? Most companies have it, old and new, believe it or not, because you might have worked for a company for 10 years. You brought the idea to that startup company. You mentioned a couple I've worked for over the years. And so I look at revenue enablement as a company thing, and that everybody is enabling that company, or maybe your channel partners, those people that are in the front line for you. Those people that are on the showroom floor, like the people with the blue shirts, right, at a Best Buy example. And I like the example because I can take that a couple steps further as we click down, as you said, and we go through our discussion here today. So that to me is revenue enablement. The other thing that I've seen in my career is some companies pay attention to the clients as a sort of job one. They want to know that not just the deployment process is right, but that the selling process and the marketing process was also right.
Yeah, it reminds me in our pre-interview, you said something about marketing, sales, and services all up on stage together, and I like the kind of illustrative part of that. But that when you said that, it occurred to me that really shifts org structures, reporting. Like this is not only a strategic shift; it's got to go down to organizational level. So how do you see this shift to revenue enablement changing that org structures, reporting, that kind of thing? How sort of intense is that?
Well, it depends on the company. Sometimes it's far more intense than other times. And probably one of the examples that I shared with you was we were working on an enablement initiative at a company where I walked into the room, sales and marketing were already in there. And within 5 minutes, they stopped the meeting and said, look, we're on board. Marketing and sales is aligned. The last time we had our company kickoff meeting, then we had our sales kickoff meeting, we were on the stage together. So to me, that's a good sign, right? That that is a sign that marketing and sales is lockstep together. I mean, who knows? You might even be hanging around at the pub later on together. That's kind of the dream, right? Is they
Yeah.
actually do, truly like to make each other's organizations better. But there's a role that's left out. And when you think about revenue enablement, the role that left out oftentimes is the service organization.
Yes.
And so there's other examples where I could share where when I asked about the service organization, they may not even know who's in that organization, or it might be done by a partner organization. So once you have all three on stage, so to speak, whether it be online or in person, all three talking about not just launching new products, not just expanding to new markets, right? But also talking about the handoff
Yes.
among these three different groups. Once that happens, again, that's the biggest inhibitor, if you will, for the value that enablement can bring into an organization. Then what I like about the service organization being involved is for them, CX is always job one, right? They've got to make the client happy. But here's the interesting part. Now there's a huge win for sales and marketing because when you think about the way in which companies buy today, it's definitely a land and expand world, right? You buy some, and then you buy more later, and so you've got to get that service right because otherwise, in a sense, you can poison the well. So that CX element, and I'm not talking about an NPS rating or something like that. That's nice for a company meeting. What I'm talking about is, are we thinking about making it easier for that prospective buyer to find us, understand us, then be sold to us, get a proposal in minutes? Are we thinking about that front end? Because Brian, one of the things that Gartner came out with recently was that when you look at loyalty of a client, that loyalty is formed not as much on the deployment side as it is in the marketing and sales side. I found that to be interesting because if you don't get marketing and sales right, the deal might not stay, right? You might not land it, first of all, but more importantly, you may not expand it. And I think for most organizations that get this right, they understand the profitable deal is that second expand deal anyway.
Right.
So to them, selling never ends.
So, what do you think the hardest part of this shift is going to be?
So the hardest part is going to be shifting your time, spending more time, not within your organization, right? Let's say that I'm in sales. Am I going to spend all my time with the sales team, the SDRs, the account executives, or am I going to spend more of my time with marketing, going through the messaging, with services, understand what the 30, 60, 90-day onboarding process looks like? And then ultimately, am I going to spend more time with clients? And whether it's going to be a ride along in the field or whether it's going to be a ride along in a web conference. So it's shifting. So I bet if you took a look at where you spend most of your time in a week, it's probably with your own team. So what if you were to shift that from 80% with your team to 80% with other groups, other departments, and the client? I think that's where the challenge is.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. I was part of the national account sort of building of the national account function, which ages the hell out of me. But it was all about sales, and the whole national account, global account, strategic account management thing was brand new. And so there was this shift of like, who does it, who runs it, who leads the shift, how are people compensated, what's the return to the business? Like, it was bringing on this new function, and it took quite some time. And I feel like this is similar. This is bringing on kind of a new function that didn't exist, and that drives me to, who do you think leads this in an organization? Like, how do you get it
Yeah.
implemented and make sure that senior management gets it and they know what the return is?
Yeah. And some don't like this response. I've been asked this question before, who leads this?
Yep.
If you say it's a company thing, then it really kind of mixes it up, doesn't it? So it's not a sales thing, it's not a marketing thing, right? If it's a marketing thing, it's about the content. If it's a sales thing, it's about the playbooks. If it's a service thing, it's about onboarding. So keep in mind it's a company thing. But using those three examples, where I would go, I'd be opportunistic. What I'd say is, what is the part of the organization that's flailing? So let's say the first part, right? The messaging isn't right and the content isn't centralized. Let's start there. And if you don't take a look at this more holistically, then right out of the gate, it's going to be, I don't want to say dead on arrival, but it's going to be very slow to grow. So why has sales enablement taken 20 years to get to this point? That's a common question, right? Well, I say that back to your point. Who does it actually report to?
Yes.
I don't think it reports to sales. I don't think it reports to marketing. I don't think it reports to CS. I think it's this cross-functional role that is somewhere in the organization fairly senior. So I don't start with what department. I start off with, is there somebody really strong in the organization that has cross-functional visibility? And no matter what department they're part of, right? What they're thinking about isn't this classic definition of sales now revenue enablement. Where they're thinking about is, how am I going to scale in that new market in 2024? How am I going to retain deals in, coming out of 2023 that are now at risk? They're thinking like that, Brian. So if that's somebody that is in a CSO kind of a role, if that's somebody that's in a CX kind of a role, so be it. But that person has to be a strong champion in the company, because otherwise these initiatives, they get pigeonholed. Suddenly now sales enablement is a training thing,
Yes.
and you don't want that. This is a very strategic initiative.
Oh, absolutely. Which is why I make the sort of analogy to going from selling to account management. That function, I think we're all there now. We all understand what it is, why we need it, what it returns, and I feel like sales enablement making the shift to revenue enablement could learn from that life cycle. But another question that comes to mind as we were talking about where it should sit and that kind of thing. So RevOps is emerging and evolving, and what do you see as the relationship between revenue enablement and RevOps?
Well, whenever you get into the operational part of the business, companies, jump into your income statement, go down to that line item called SG&A. You're going to see a really big number, especially with high growth companies, especially tech companies. I work a lot today with healthcare companies, helping them better enable marketing and sales. That number is huge. And the reason it's huge is enabling sales, everything from training to coaching to content, is really expensive.
Yes.
So when a company says, so we're going to have to go find a budget for this, my response to them is, you're already spending money on it. The question is it random acts of enablement? Right? The ops team doesn't think about random acts of anything, right? Product launches down through deployments, they want to know, right, what that line in the income statement says, and they want to bring that number down, the cost of sale down. So I think in the end, this isn't a revenue, rev rec discussion as much as it is understanding where are we spending money across the whole buyer journey.
Okay.
So we're not spending it all in sales, we're not spending it all in deployment, we're not spending it all in marketing. Because in the end, if you look at the sales process aligned to the buyer journey, then you can take a closer look at, do we have spending going on throughout that cycle? If you see where I'm going with this, once companies after 6, 12, sometimes a decade deployment with us in the past would say, once we had the organization on board, then at that point there was a cross-functional team assembled. So every time we launched a new product, every time we bought a new company, we went to enablement and we asked the question, how are we going to make this work in our company?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that makes sense,
Yeah.
Brian, but it's usually the more mature companies, they think about this as a business problem and challenge. They start there. They don't think of this as tools. They don't think about it as content. They think about it as a business problem they're looking to solve.
Yeah, and I think that gets to my next question about sort of the very nature of this being either evolution or revolution. And you mentioned earlier, like my words, not yours. Like go to where the bleeding is. Like where do we have most pain today? So that would lead
Yes.
toward more evolution.
So the evolution versus revolution, it depends on the company. If the company is siloed off, Brian, if the company has been doing business a certain way, just like your example from earlier, for let's say a decade, this is going to be a bit revolutionary for them.
Yes.
There's going to be some people that are going to say, look, it's that muscle memory thing, right? This is the way we launch products. And I jump in the launch call, and sure enough, it's one group, not the three groups I talked about earlier. Why wouldn't you have all three groups talking about how we're going to message it, sell it, and service it? So for those companies, it is a bit of revolutionary.
Yes.
And what I tend to do with companies is I introduce this idea of first just getting aligned. If you are in a revolutionary state, let's align the organization. Sometimes companies are already there, and it's going to be more of an evolution. So with them, it's more, let's become unified. In other words, let's rationalize. And there's four elements, right? There's the people involved, there's the process involved. It's not just the selling process. There's many different processes, microprocesses. There's the content involved. But you notice I left technology as the fourth. So people, process, content, technology. For companies that look holistically at all four, for them, this is a natural evolution. It can happen in a 12-month cycle. For those that are siloed off, they're not unified, In fact, even the technologies are different within the organization. The content, some of them are creating the same things.
Yes.
The services, there isn't a repeatable service model. So because of that, for them, it's going to be revolutionary. It might take a couple of years.
Yeah, it occurs to me that it's kind of there's also just a fundamental change management part of this, right? Like separate of the revenue enablement function, leaning on some classic sort of change management models and techniques to move the organization forward.
Yeah, let's talk about the adoption curve because for companies that align to clients, let's say they are very customer oriented today.
Yeah.
It's not so much go to market as it is go to customer. Those companies, they're aligned, very little change management. With them, it's just all right. Let's get going, and because the quicker they get going and repeat, the quicker they're going to have analytics. And the best part about the machine learning element of using technology for the things we're talking about here. So let's use an example. Let's say we have 4 use cases we're going to get right in 2024 and 2025. The first case is going to be we're going to onboard all staff, but each onboarding process is going to be subject to their role. The SDR role is going to be different than the partner role, which is going to be different than the CS role. But let's say we have one now, repeatable across all. So we're onboarding people the same way. Then we have analytics that matter. Right? If you don't have a definition, the analytics don't really matter. So then the second element is going to be the way we launch products. And whether you build your company through acquisitions. I was with a company a few years back. They bought 70 firms in 1 year. That was like a record for a deployment that I was doing at the time. 70 in a year. And that company basically said, look, we're going to rationalize the people, the process, the content technology. They got it. And so I thought that was a really, big move for them. So now we got to launch things the same way. They were growing through acquisitions. Let's say you grow organic and you launch 4 products this year. So let's repeat the way we product launch. Then it's all right, now how do we get better at not just landing new opportunities, but expanding them? So now we're getting into the account management, right? Strategic account management, and basically going deeper and broader at the same time. So let's say we get those 3 use cases right. What's been interesting is I had a client years ago who they reduced their content after 18 months by 92%. Their training, enablement, deployment content, they reduced it by over 90% because they, in a sense, found out what was noise. And they not only focused on the 8% that mattered, but they also focused on processes and tools. So they started eliminating not just tools, but processes, which is cool, right? Because if I come in the morning, I want to go do some selling. I don't want to, start my day with all these different technologies, but I want to, start my day with process. But I use that example because once you have that kind of machine learning going on, watching what's making a difference, not just with your staff, but your partners and your clients, because you can see all that now.
Yeah.
Then you can make a decision around what are the best doing and what are the not so, people not making their numbers doing. And by doing that, then you can start using the technology to get rid of content that doesn't matter, process doesn't matter. I made that point already, but then start promoting what the best are doing. And that's what I always wanted to know, right? When I went to the club trips, if you had that chance to go, what are you doing? You don't talk to the other, people in your organization as often as you should, the successful ones, and they're too busy anyway, right? So how do you find out what you used to find out once a year, every day, every week?
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting too that you bring up the content number. It just sort of bisected in my brain with a study I saw a couple of years ago. American Marketing Association said 90% of the content delivered by marketing to sales is not being used. And you just sort of verified that number with the 8% or whatever it was. That's like astounding sort of numbers and wastefulness.
And I think about this company, and as I kind of remember, the details of it, they had 7,500 sellers. They had a mix of very experienced, tenure working for the firm, selling for the firm, and then they had people right out of school. So, you got to know that you have content that matters to many different kind of audiences. Then you had to get rid of the stuff that didn't matter. And I don't know about you, but more is not more in my day. I'd much rather come in and look at the 8% that mattered. Well, one of the questions I'd be asked is, so what 8% mattered? It was the video testimonials from the
Interesting.
clients. All of that survived. There was the playbook that talked about coaching before and after the call. In other words, I went to training, the company kickoff training in January, but I'm now selling in July, right? So I've already lost all that knowledge. You know, Give me that understanding of how to best position to this vertical in this city with the best references in that area. If you can deliver that type of thing, that's real value to people that are promoting and deploying your solutions.
Yeah, it's interesting too that you talk about sort of best practices of the A players. And I've heard a lot. One of my partners says, you want to scale best practice to common practice, and I love that quote. But one of the things that always strikes me from having been a sales leader in a prior life is a lot of those leads were sitting in really robust territories, and so there's that. How do you net out sort of what's the luck of sitting in this particular geo or something, or a new product that rolled out versus actually what are you doing in terms of process every day? What data are you collecting and using? Yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about ride-alongs, whether it be on a conference call or in person. You can't just go to New York City to go gather what's going on in the field. You can't just go
Kind
to
of my
San
point.
Francisco.
Yes.
You have to go to Omaha. You have to go to Des Moines. And I'm not picking on those cities. And what I used to do is I would go to an A player in every one of these sort of different disparate cities, because what worked on the East Coast versus West Coast was different, but what worked in the Midwest was very different. And so back to enablement and training and coaching and so on, once you do that, and just to let's say North America, what you find is that I had the opportunity once to do enablement across 4 regions around the globe, and in selling in the Far East, way different,
Yes.
right, than selling
Yeah.
in this case here in Europe.
Yeah.
And in Europe was a whole new animal.
Yeah.
So you kind of find out, Brian, that cultures are different, people sell different, and you better go figure out what they're doing.
Yeah, it's funny because I think we all default to EMEA versus APAC is going to be different for sure. But I'm hearing this more lately that sort of New York versus Texas is
Yeah.
almost the equivalent of global geos. So I have a final question for you around measuring success. So can you contrast sort of what the success metrics are or were for sales enablement, and what should we be measuring in a revenue enablement model?
Yeah, let's come back to, let's use KPIs, the term here. Let's come back with a set of KPIs that cut across marketing, sales, partner, if you got a partner organization, and services. Have a set of KPIs that all 4 of those groups I just mentioned are aligned on. And don't just make it about MQLs and SQLs and closed deals, make it about the experience. Check in with those clients during the entire cycle to say not just how you found us, but how was the experience? Not just, how did that first deployment go, but how's it going now? Is the company just checking in once a year, right? The annual check-in call, usually right before the service
Yeah.
renews. That's probably not so good. So my thought is if you want to measure it and get it right, first of all, agree on what you want to measure. And I would want to measure, the CX, the experience through the whole cycle. Did we make it easier to find us? The messaging, right? Understand us, the selling. The proposal came back in minutes, not weeks, right? Even right down to the SLA and whatever else you have to put in place for your clients. If you make that easier, keeping in mind that loyalty is formed based on the way you market and sell to them. So put emphasis on measuring that. And in terms of where to get started, so earlier we talked about use cases that
Yeah.
mattered. Don't start and stop with sales onboarding, right? That's been a popular use case for many years. Don't start and stop with some other element of launching, I don't know, maybe a new white paper. Start and stop with, launching across all roles the way we do business to make it a company thing. And then the second thing is just pick the points of pain that are the greatest. If right now you're shifting to an account-based selling model, you're shifting to selling over in Europe. I was asked this morning about, channels and resellers. So let's say you're shifting to that. Take what you've learned from the past and apply it and make enablement a discussion around, all right, how are we going to sell more through the channel in 2024, 25, 26? You really got to be thinking more long term, because I think for those that have gone from a direct model to an indirect model, not easy, takes a lot of time. When they start taking paper and you get frustrated and you say, all right, when are you going to start really selling and servicing? Measure the KPIs that show you where things are working or not. Back to your earlier example from the AMA, we went to market with them many years ago. And in the early conversations, their question was to us, because we were more on the sales side, Brian, versus the marketing side. They said, we're going to put you in front of over 100,000 of our community. And what they want to know oftentimes is how to make them relevant, how to make their messaging actually get used. There is nothing more frustrating than to bring somebody in marketing out to the field and we stop off at Kinko's on the way. I'm dating myself now. And they start doing brochures, right, localized for their vertical market. And the marketing person is saying, well, what gives?
Yeah,
Why aren't we doing that on your behalf? So measure the things that matter. And with the EMA, that 10% that matter. Because the one thing that, and coming back to that example, when they retired 93%, they said there was an immediate response in morale going up
interesting.
because people that were doing the marketing, the training, the selling, and the servicing now were having to learn less and focus on the stuff that mattered. So morale went up because they kind of had a sense, hey, this stuff is being used. Create a white paper, take 3 months to use it, and then go out and find the analytics close to zero. And you'll know what I mean. It's very
Yeah,
frustrating.
it
So the question then would be, did they align it to a problem in the company, a real business problem, or was it just kind of this soft launch of something that they expected people would use?
Yeah, I think it's funny because it was as we have this discussion, there's like the impact on the customer all the way through, and maybe I have PTSD from trying to introduce a new function into a Fortune 50 that I keep listening to what you're saying, and as you talked about measuring success of revenue enablement, that sure sounds like a business case for senior leadership to bring up to whoever is bringing this up to senior leadership. That sounds like maybe the fundamental business case to say we need to adjust this function, we need to expand it.
A favorite quote from Scott Santucci, you might have heard of
Yes.
him, right? Is random acts of sales
Yeah.
enablement. If the company is doing that, and again, you look at that income statement, you'll see the number, it's a big number. You're already spending the money. But the question is, are you spending it wisely? Before you add another sales process, before you add another CRM, right? Before you do these things with the latest, technology or process of the day, really stop and ask, what impact is this going to have on my sellers, my partners, and my
Yeah.
customers? I think that's something to kind of leave this discussion with because we had clients for over a decade where, our whole thing was whatever process you use, selling or buying, just pick one, and then refine and make that better. But get going, moving forward. So you do have to make it a business problem and know that companies are already spending the money. This is not a new budget item.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Well, it's an exciting time, and it's fun to kind of be part of the change. And as you mentioned earlier, like 20 years of evolution of sales enablement, we can't do that with this one. So, and I
No.
don't think it's gonna. I think there's more enabling technologies, as you say, machine learning and other data we can pull in to make this business case. But it can't. Yeah, this is something that hopefully moves more quickly. But it's going to be fun to maybe have this conversation again. 6 months might be too soon, but a year from now to see how much movement has happened. But yeah, I really appreciate your time and your insight. And yeah, I look forward to revisiting and seeing how this journey goes over the next year.
Yeah, no, let's get together in 9 to 12 months. I lead up sales and marketing here at Triptych. We've been doing this for over 20 years, this kind of work. We focus on regulated industries. I'd love to come back to you and talk about machine learning. So let's say that we nail, 2 to 3 of these use cases we've already talked about on today's call, Brian. I'd love to come back in 9 to 12 months, maybe even bring in somebody that does some of the machine learning work with us to say, what have we learned, across our clients that are selling into regulated industries? And what is it we can learn from going into 2025? The holy grail is obviously repeating sales success. It ain't easy. But if you can use the measurements, AI is exciting. That's kind of rejuvenated a lot of companies now. Then they know going fully digital in 12 months will matter. You'll learn things that you didn't know, just 3 weeks ago. Thanks for having me today, Brian. I sure appreciate it.
It was really fun. I appreciate it.